Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody is having a great day. Doing not too bad. If you're new to this channel, I hope you stick around and hit that subscribe button. If you aren't new and you're coming back, welcome back. It's great to see you. Today we are working on Succubus again and having a nice good old whip and chat. None of my supplies have changed up, so there's nothing exciting to show you there. We'll just dive right in. So I thought for this one it might be fun to tell you the rescue stories about my dogs, I should say. I've got two of them. They're fairly short, so then I'll get into the longer journey that my son has kind of been through, and then you'll get to know a little bit of back history there. So when you hear me kind of talking about him and discussing him, you'll understand certain elements a little bit easier, I think, and get a better idea of kind of the inner day-to-day workings that happen for me, as I'm a stay-at-home mom right now, and I very much concentrate on him and his schedule. So we'll start you off with the first one, which will be the first dog that we got, Trigger. He is now 17 years old. Very, very, very old guy. And he is our Jack Russell Terrier. And he is what me and my husband like to call a self rescue, because his story is a little bit different than just kind of your everyday rescue story. And so we, at the time, were just engaged and had made the decision that we would like to add a dog to our family, add a pet. And so we were, at the time, we were only living in a townhouse, and so they only allowed kind of smaller breeds. And so we started doing our research on smaller breeds and what kind of breeds we would maybe like, and we had ended up settling on the Jack Russell Terrier. And what we liked about a Jack Russell Terrier was not only the size, it didn't feel like a teacup breed that would have been so small that we would have been constantly stepping on or tripping over, but had a little bit of kind of size to them as well, but still would make, fit that kind of small breed lap dog kind of thing. And we were looking for a little bit of a higher energy breed as well. We didn't want one that was too laid back, because we like to go out and spend time outside, and we were wanting to kind of get into walking a dog and little things like that. So we started looking around at Jack Russell Terriers, and of course, being in our early 20s at the time, we couldn't really afford one from a breeder. That was just out of our range, because we were also saving up for a wedding. And so we started looking around at rescues and ended up coming across Trigger's picture on a pound website just outside of our city, actually. And so, we kind of liked his picture. We thought he was fairly cute. They said he was just over a year old, so we figured that was a good age for us as well, because he would essentially, or should essentially, have been fairly well trained by that point, and wouldn't require a lot of the overnight wake up early bathroom breaks that you do with puppies and stuff like that as well. So we figured that was, kind of a good age. And so we had phoned them, because he hadn't been put up onto their actual adoption side yet, and so we were inquiring as to how long normally do they wait before they put the animals onto that side of the site, so that in hopes we could kind of, get ahead and kind of get our name in to potentially adopt him. Well, when we phoned and talked to them, they had actually said that his previous owner had come and picked him up, and so that he wouldn't be going onto the adoption side. So, you know, we were kind of disappointed because this was one that we had kind of had our eye on, and we went, oh, okay, well, you know, thanks, that sort of thing. And said, if you ever get another Jack Russell in, can we leave our name and number so you could contact us. So that's what we did. They were good with that, and they liked the fact that we kind of knew we had a breed in mind and stuff, and okay, yeah, sometimes we get those in, we'll let you know. So they took down our name and number, and then we hung up the phone. We were disappointed. Okay, it didn't work out. We'll keep looking. Not the end of the world. And I think it was maybe half an hour later, they had called us back, and they said, okay, well, the previous owner had come and picked him up, but he doesn't want to keep him, and I guess somehow they had talked about us being interested in him, and so the pound actually asked us, is it okay if we give him your guys' number to contact you? So that kind of got us excited again. We're like, yeah, okay. Sure, we have no issues with that. And so they passed on our name to this previous owner, and he phoned us and said, I hear you guys are interested in Jack Russell. When would you like to come meet him? And I think we arranged it for the following day. That is kind of what worked out for them and us. And so we drove all the way out. I think it was only about half hour outside of the city where this guy had lived. And so we had met him, met Trigger, and we're kind of asking the background, like a little bit about the background on him. And he said, oh, well, my wife had gotten pregnant and we had given him away when he was like 3 or 4 months old to this other family. So he actually hasn't been our dog for the past year or so. So that kind of took us back, and we're like, okay, well, this guy who owns this dog tracked back to him, first of all, as the original owner, who gave him away because his wife was pregnant. So we said, well, why is that? And he's like, I guess they never transferred over the license or anything like that. And he's like, I had their phone number and I tried to get a hold of them, but it kept giving me that this number no longer exists and all this other stuff. And he had said that they had given him away originally because he was going to be too high energy to have around a kid. Or at least that's what they felt. Going with the classic breed of Jack Russell being very high energy. And so we're like, okay, well, you know, what price are you thinking that you would like to sell him for? And he's like, well, I haven't owned this dog in forever. And he's like, I really don't want him, obviously. And so he had just really requested the pound fee for the time Trigger had been in a pound, which was $25 Canadian, if you believe it or not, which we thought was kind of a steal of a deal. I guess in some respects that should have raised a little bit of a red flag, and I didn't see anything about a wife or a kid just being at that house, so who knows how much of this story is actually, or what he had said is actually true. But regardless, we paid 25 bucks, took Trigger home with us that day, and had been told originally when that person had owned him, they had named him Kane. And so we hadn't had Trigger's name at that point, and so we were calling this dog Kane, but we're nowhere near hooked on that name. And so we're living with this new dog that we'd rescued for 25 bucks from who knows what kind of background. Obviously messed up because he had been found just outside of the city scrounging for food and had been out there for a couple of days by the sounds of it. So anyways, we had brought this dog home and we're calling it Kane and it's not responding. So then we're going, okay, well obviously it hasn't been called Kane. These other people must have changed its name, if that's even a true story. So we're like, I guess that means since he's not hooked on Kane, we can, you know, choose a name or find a name that this dog will respond to. And so here we are, coming up with all these names that, you know, we wouldn't mind. And out of all things, he responds to Trigger. And so we're like, okay, I guess your name's Trigger. And so he started responding to Trigger, and we started getting to know this dog a little bit more as we had owned him, and quickly discovered that if you did any quick movements towards his face, he would kind of shrink back and duck. And so that led us to believe that maybe at some point he had been abused or hit. So we really had to work with him on not making quick movements towards his face, going slower, kind of approaching him from the side, and we would kind of say, okay, we're going to pet you on the head or whatever. And soon that became less and less. I mean, he still does it to this day, except more so with people that he doesn't know if you go too fast towards him. He still kind of has that instinct to shrink back and down a bit. So we strongly believe something there, like he was hit or abused in some way. Even though we don't necessarily know that about his story. He still scrounges like he doesn't get fed. Mind you, that has slowed down drastically since we've had him all these years. He's kind of at least knows that there's food in the dish. So he's not too bad, but I mean, obviously if there's still food on the floor, he's right there in 2 seconds gobbling it up like he hasn't eaten or won't be eating in days. So there's still a lot of little habits like that that kind of tell me that he's had a little bit of a rough life. And so we call him our self-rescue because we don't know his full story. We don't know exactly what he went through other than what was given to us for information, which is hard to say how much of that is true. We just know he was at the pound and he was found outside of our city scrounging and had been for the last couple of days. So that's his story, and he's now 17, and while I say he still kind of has some of those habits that I don't think will ever fully go away, he has turned into such an awesome little dog and is actually way more mellow than a lot of Jack Russells. He is totally fine with just lounging around the house. He'll bark at everything that moves, of course, but what do you do? That's just the way he is. And he is actually very, very good with our son. He has been since day one. And they're actually really good buddies. They will sit there and play on the floor together, and when my son is having a bath, he has to be in the bathroom, laying down on the floor close by. If our Jack had his way, he would sleep in our son's bedroom, I'm pretty sure, up on the bed with him. So he's very much all about his little boy and loves being around his little kid and playing with him and following him around and licking him when he's laying on the floor and all that good stuff. And it's a really cool little relationship to see between them, considering his previous owner supposedly felt like he was not going to be a good dog to have around kids because being high energy. Well, I could not think of a better dog to have around our son. he has the perfect amount of energy for him. He plays with him, spends time with him, wants to be close to him, but at the same time, he's more than okay to kick back and relax when we're all just doing our thing in the living room. So that's his story. And our next one is about our big girl, Janaya. And she was actually she's our Husky Shepherd mix. That's what we were told. I'm pretty sure she might have like a collie or maybe even a wolf in her or something, just because of some of her other mannerisms and her overall look. There's definitely something else, but that's all we were told. And she wasn't rescued per se herself. It was actually her mother that got rescued when she was carrying the litter that Janaya was a part of. And this rescue worked mainly just outside of our city, out at our Indigenous reserves out there. And so they took in a lot of puppies that maybe the reserve, whoever had owned them, couldn't afford, or if they were injured or really, really sick, they would be surrendered by the original owners at the reserve, because a lot of them were low income and couldn't afford those big extra costs. But you know, like everybody, they like their animals and all that. So I guess when her mother got pregnant, came one of those situations where whoever owned them decided to surrender her mom because they couldn't afford whatever would be necessary. They had no idea, first of all, puppies, right? They couldn't afford puppies, didn't have the means or desire to try and sell the puppies, and kind of the aftercare, I guess, probably that goes into having a dog who has puppies, and probably couldn't afford the cost of the food and little things like that while you're waiting for them to reach an age to find their homes. So her mom was surrendered, and so she was born into the rescue with her litter. And the way the rescue we got them from worked things out were that they would name their litters by the letter. So Janai is the part of what they called the G litter. So all the pups in that litter's name started with G's. G's. Started with the letter G. And so when we were looking at getting a second dog, we had just bought in our house, and so we had the room for a larger breed. And we had started looking at a few different puppies through the rescue that we had our eye on. Some were lab mixes, and then others were the German Shepherd mixes. And we were actually interested in Janaya and her sister Gypsy. And what we loved about them was not only their breed, but their coloring. And Janaya has more of the shepherd coloring with some white. And then her sister actually had no white whatsoever and was all just that kind of brindled shepherd look with these intense hazel eyes, like absolutely stunning, gorgeous. So two slightly different looking dogs, both equally gorgeous. And of course the rescue says any pets and people in the home, it's best to bring them all out to the kind of the meet and see how everybody gets along. So that's what we did. It was just us at the time and Trigger. And so we went out and we met these two siblings, Gypsy and Janaya, and we let all the dogs kind of run around, do their natural thing. Kind of me and my husband watched, both of them, and Janaya ran up to my husband and said hello. And the rescue ladies were both shocked. And so was the foster mom that had Janaya, because they were like, oh, she normally avoids men at all costs. Like, for whatever reason, she just was not a fan of men. And so she usually shied away from them rather than running right up to them. So that kind of, we were like, oh, well, okay, well, that's not the case here. She like ran right up to Denise to say hello, wanted some pets, and then skittered off to go venture around, and we continued to kind of observe and watch, and Gypsy actually got kind of snippy and cranky with Trigger and wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. Every time he would even come near her, she'd kind of growl and grump and try to get across the little tennis court that we were hanging out on. Whereas Janaya, she couldn't care less what Trigger was doing. He was running around doing his thing, and she was like, okay, I'm cool with you, you know, do your thing, I'll do my thing. And she didn't really either way ignore him or pay much attention to him. But she didn't get cranky with him. She didn't growl. She didn't give us any kind of signs that, you know, get this dog away from me. So that to us kind of said, you know, they could potentially get along once they kind of got to know each other better, and maybe be fairly compatible as being two dogs in the same household. So, you know, we kind of watched a little bit longer, and that continued to be the way. They just kind of let each other be and were content being in each other's space. And so that's actually why we chose Janaya over her sister Gypsy, even though originally we had gone into that meeting thinking that we would end up getting Gypsy and bringing her home. Eventually, well, we chose Janaya, and the rescue was very good. They would then kind of come check out the house, make sure, you know, the space was good for that breed, make sure the backyard was a nice size. Basically that we knew what we were doing and weren't lying through our teeth saying that we own this nice big home with this home with the backyard and that kind of thing. And so they came out and they checked that out, and of course that was all as it should be. And then once again just kind of let Trigger and Janaya run around, but this time in Trigger's space. A space that, you know, the dog is already kind of maybe territorial about or considers his home, and now this other dog's possibly trespassing. So that went fine. And so that was kind of, at that point, she says, okay, she's, you know, settled in, she's doing well, she's yours. And at that point, she was handed off, and we now own this dog. And at that time, Janaya was 7 months old, and she was a very shy, very, very shy, timid dog. And the only thing that we knew about her foster home was that it was out on an acreage, and that there were 14 other dogs that she was there with in this foster home. And the foster mom actually owned her mother, and so that was all we really kind of knew about her past. But it was always so weird that she never liked men, but was drawn to Denise. She was, like I said, a very shy, timid kind of dog. She was so shy, in fact, that when new people came in, when we first got her, she would hide behind either me and Denise. When she kind of got to know us, that was her thing that she would do. And she wasn't a very social dog. Like, she was good with other dogs, but she didn't run around and play with them, that kind of thing. She just kind of did her own thing and all of that. And at first she was very nervous around kind of loud noises, kids, so we did a lot of going to the dog park with her and walking her past parks where kids were playing, walking her kind of in around kind of traffic areas so she would get used to the noise, and just kind of getting her used to city life, really, because she was out on an acreage for so long and was probably used to things being fairly quiet and stuff like that. And so that was kind of the major work that we did with her. She was always very obedient, very well behaved. after having her for a while, she really blossomed and came out of her shell. And I think it was only maybe about a year later that she had kind of really come out, and we had run into the lady who owned the rescue and the foster mom again. And they were even watching her run around at the time. I think it was at some sort of dog event, I want to say, that we had run into them, or an adoption event or something. And we had Janaya with us. And they're like, wow, she's a whole other dog. Like, we've never seen her this confident and this social and friendly, because like she was there, she was good with everybody, she wasn't nervous, she wasn't hiding behind us. She had truly come out of her shell and would actually be seeking attention from people that she didn't really know that well. Like if they wanted to come up and see her, we're like, yep, she's great, she won't bite, that kind of thing, and you're more than welcome to pet her, and she would soak up all the attention. And even our friends that would come over a couple months after we had her, they noticed how much she had come out of her shell, and she would go right over to them and be like, here's my butt, scritch it, give me some love. And so she, like the rescue and her foster mom said, she really came out of her shell and was like a completely different dog with how confident and social she was. And so that was kind of neat to hear that, you know, they had seen an improvement from the shy, timid dog that they had raised as a puppy. And so those are the kind of the rescue stories of our dogs. Nothing overly crazy or traumatic, but they definitely have their little quirks and habits that remind us of those every day. And they're both older, and they both they love their kid and they love their family, and they've got to be around us. And I think they, you know, they're happy where they are, and I hope they have a happy time with us, and that we've kind of given them a safe, secure environment where they feel loved and like they should. And so that's their story. The next story now that I'm going to talk about is a little bit more about my son. He has quite the story of his own, and he is a special little guy. And he was a long time coming, and went through quite a bit when he did come, Earthside as we like to call it. And he's been through quite a bit, but he has turned into such an amazing little guy, with such a fun little personality. But we made the decision, I guess, to have a kid and start having kids, and I knew that we were going to have some fertility issues, which this could be a sensitive topic for others. But I have what they call polycystic ovary syndrome. And so that can lower the chances of being able to conceive on your own. So we had sought out and gone through a whole fertility journey to even be able to have a child of our own. And some people may not like that we've had to go through that, and that's fine. That's their point of view. And others probably could care less. And that's fine too. To each their own. But this is just his journey and what our decision. And it's not that we didn't want to look at other methods. They were certainly on our radar and are still on our radar if we ever decide that we want to expand our family. But for his story, we had gone through the fertility treatments, and we weren't sure if any of those were going to work. It's all kind of a very unknown thing. You just kind of go through the treatments and hope for the best, and there's a lot of up and downs with that. I won't go into too many details, of course, with that, but we had spent a good couple of years anyways going through that journey, and he was conceived through IVF in the long run. And so he was our big fat positive through an IVF treatment that we had gone through. And we were super, super excited. He is our first and only child at this time. And like I said, he was conceived through IVF, and we were super, super excited about the success of that treatment. But also, after everything we had gone through, just those procedures and those treatments, there was also some hesitation with sharing the news because we weren't sure kind of supporting that pregnancy going forward, what that was going to look like, and so we kind of held back on the announcement front. And initially, when we got the news, we only told the people who had helped us financially to get where we were, and so that was basically just my parents, my husband's mom, and my aunt. Nobody else at the time knew early that things had been a success, and of course they were all ecstatic because they had known everything we had gone through at this point, and it was some pretty exciting news we were expecting for the first time. So we went through that, and then we had made the announcement at the normal kind of 13-week mark to the rest of the family and our really close friends that we consider family, and we had kind of done that announcement at a backyard fire pit evening with our friends, and kind of they were all excited, and I remember one of our friends saying, "I'm finally going to be an uncle." And the funny thing is, it's not that he wasn't an uncle prior to, it was just he was going to be an honorary uncle to our little guy, and so that was something they had been excited about, and they kind of knew, some of our really close friends knew what we had kind of gone through roughly to kind of get to this point in this news, so a lot of them were really stoked, really excited for us, and there was a lot of love and support, and that was amazing. So at that point, mostly everybody that we had wanted to tell in person knew the great news, and so we had shared that news at that point with everybody that we felt we wanted to know about this news in person before we went ahead and we shared the news on social media. And of course, the fun way we did that was with our 2 dogs. We had them laying down in our spare room that was going to be our future child's room, and we had one sign that said guard duty dog, or guard dog duty starts on our original expected due date. And then the other one said I think it was parents or something like that, if I remember correctly. My parents are getting me a tiny little human, and so we felt like that really related to our 2 dogs. Of course, our big girl, who's the German Shepherd Husky mix, she was going to be the guard dog duty, because she's very much just naturally a protector of everybody in her vicinity, pretty much. She's going to keep an eye on everybody, knows where everybody is, so she was the guard dog duty one. And then our little Jack was my humans are getting me a tiny human one. And that was because we felt like he was going to probably view our child as more of his playmate than anything else, because he's not, I mean, he barks at everything that moves, but he's not much of a protector. He just barks because he's got big dog syndrome. So we had made that announcement at about shortly after that 13-week kind of mark, and it honestly felt like there was only weeks where our family and friends and everybody kind of knew what was going on before we got the news that that I was having some issues and needed to go on bed rest at home. And then they wanted to start monitoring me more closely, and that was because they had seen my cervix shortening at this point in time. And that's usually kind of a sign that, you know, the pregnancy is having some issues. That was kind of scary. But they said, yeah, I could still get up and go to the bathroom, make myself meals, and things like that. So I was like, okay, well, it's manageable. I'm at home. I'm still comfortable. I can do bed rest. And so I followed those orders. I only got up when I went to pretty much go to the bathroom or grab a drink. I would spend time in the bedroom, kind of kicking back, relaxing, reading, watching shows, sleeping, and then I would occasionally kind of go for the change of scenery and pop out onto the living room couch. But if I did that, I would stay out on that couch unless I had to get up and get a drink or go bathroom. Now this is all on a one floor, so I didn't have to do any stairs, nothing major, just a little short kind of walk down the hallway at most, so I didn't do a lot of walking around. And I went in for my next weekly follow-up, and at that point they had said that I was actually dilated. I was starting to dilate, and my cervix was maybe 1 centimeter. And that's a huge, huge sign. And so they ended up admitting me. Like, I couldn't even pay for extra parking. I couldn't move my vehicle, nothing. It was, you're getting admitted, you're not getting up off this bed, you're on bed rest at the hospital. And this was, by this point, I was panicking a little bit, but I held it together. And I just, okay, like, there's not much I can do. I can't argue. I hope I don't get towed. I'm kind of inner panicking, but trying to remain calm. And so, like, literally they wheeled me from the bed at the clinic into where they go for the high-risk maternity kind of area at the hospital. And that was it. I had to kind of phone my husband, my parents, and say, my appointment has now turned into me being on bed rest at the hospital. The car is parked here, and I need the following items brought to me to the hospital because I can't go home to get anything. And so they made sure I was set up very comfortably. They brought me a bunch of books, they brought me some coloring books, they brought me my iPad, my laptop, whatever. Got me all set up so that, you know, I could comfortably do whatever while I was in the hospital on bed rest, stuck in a bed. And this, like, I didn't know what to think or do, or, I mean, at this point, I was only like 20, what would I have been, 23-ish weeks along, so fairly early, and I thought I would be stuck there for Christmas, and I thought I would be stuck on bed rest at the hospital for months, and I really didn't know what any of this would look like, and I didn't like the idea, and but, you know, you do what you have to do, because at this point, the longer I could keep him in, the better. So here I am laying in the hospital, 23-ish weeks, and really unsure what to expect. And my family brings me in everything you could think of. Coloring books, PJs, you name it. And I'm in the hospital bed, and I'm, you know, they're doing their best. They're working, and they're coming and they're visiting me when they can, and I've got a couple of friends that stop by and kind of try to keep me company and chat so that I don't get too bored while I'm stuck in the bed, because I couldn't even get up and move around on the floor, nothing. And the thing about this ward that I was in is some ladies can. Some ladies are able to get up and go out, and they have movie nights, and they have like all these other little fun events, and they had a fridge that you could store snacks in, but no, I couldn't. So I mean, they did the best to kind of make me comfortable in my room, but it was I binge watched a lot of Netflix and a bunch of other shows, and it was tough to be there, and honestly kind of boring and depressing, and I did my best and kind of got through it and hoped for the best, and that, you know, nothing would continue to go sideways or south, or, you know, this was just a one-off, that I could kind of continue to carry him and all that. And the scary part about when you're in a ward like this is you do get the NICU doctors that come in, and they tell you kind of the viability of your child, and based off their size and their weight and how far along you are, and talk to you about the risks and all that involved on if things do go that way. But I continue to kind of hold on to the hope that that wouldn't be my story. That I would be kind of one of those long-term patients, as much as I didn't want to be, but that I would be one of those long-term patients in the hospital, waiting for my due date kind of come, or at least as close to that I could possibly get, that would be of a safe viability. But unfortunately, that was not me or my son's story. Things continued to progress despite my best efforts, the hospital's best efforts, and while I was in there just less than a week, so I think I had only been there like six days, and I mean, all I did was get up and go to a bathroom in a hospital room in the same room that I was in. Not much. I was in bed otherwise, and then my water broke when I got up to go to the bathroom, and it freaked me right out. Nobody was there with me at the time. It just happened. I had to ring the bell. I had to tell them, you know, I'm pretty sure my water broke, all of that. I had wet the PJs that I was in. I had wet my bedding. They sent in right away and did an examination, confirmed that was what had happened. And immediately at that point, they put you in a wheelchair and they bring you up to the maternity ward at that point. And I got set up in a room up there. And because at this point I was 24 plus 6 weeks along, they ended up doing, I think it was a magnesium or something like that, drip. And their hope for that is usually a 24-hour, over the 24-hour period, and that's to kind of help baby's brain development. Viability at that point, I think, was he had a 70% chance of survival, and numerous possible issues that could occur and were up in the air, and those were things like lots of developmental delays, disabilities, autism, you name it. It was pretty much a chance that he would have it. So that in itself was kind of scary. You were going into unknown, and that was if he was going to even survive, whether or not he would breathe on his own, who knew. Either way, he was going to be going into the NICU if he came. There was just so many possibilities. But then they also tried to be really reassuring, and they would tell me things like, oh, you know, there's lots of women that this happens to, and then they get their magnesium drips and they're back in their rooms, like the room downstairs, that they would be back in their rooms again, and they would be on bed rest, and they could carry to term. So once again, I kind of thought, okay, well, you know, if they're saying this obviously happens, and I'm going to trust them and hope that I'm one of these people. Well, no, that was not the story. My husband, of course, after I told them that my water broke, he was there, like, he left work early, even though I said, you know, like, there's not going to be much going on, there's no point, but he had left work early to come be there in my new location, and just kind of be there with me. And my parents came, I think, that night, and we all just tried to remain positive, even though it was an extremely kind of scary, really kind of a scary situation with a lot of unknowns. They stayed and visited for a couple of hours before they went home. And then we were debating on whether or not should my husband go home. And I just, for some reason, had this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that, you know, as much as I want you to, I also feel like I need you here. So I asked him to stay the night just because I was really, really unsure. And that night we tried to go to sleep, I think around 9 or 10, and I did my best. I was tired, I wanted to sleep, I was constantly worrying. I know he didn't have the most comfortable spot. It was just kind of a chair that folded out into a bed, and so of course his sleep wasn't great. And then every hour I was sitting there in pain, complaining that, as I described it, it felt like I needed to poop. That's the best way to describe it. I had so much pressure that it felt like I needed to poop constantly. Even though I obviously didn't have to, that was just how it was. And I kept telling my nurse, you know, that this is the feeling I'm having, I'm getting this about every hour. And they kept saying, oh, that's normal, it's because your water's broken, and, you know, all of that. And don't worry too much about it. And then I think this has gone on for about 3 hours, something like that, 4 hours. And that's when they finally realized, okay, you know, she's been having contractions the whole time. And usually when that happens, you're getting more and more dilated and you're going into labor. So they had the doctor come in, do an examination, and sure enough, right away they said, you're 10 centimeters, you're having the baby now. So here I am, 26 plus 4 weeks along, and they're telling me I'm giving birth to my child right this moment. Like, it's happening whether you want it to or not, the baby's coming. Despite everything we had tried. And I'm just going, oh my god, like, I don't know what to expect. I'm freaking out. My husband's up at this point calling my parents, letting them know it's happening. And he's on the phone, and meanwhile he's on the phone telling them. I've got a room quickly filling up with people, like all sorts of doctors and nurses, and they're telling me, okay, now, you know, directing me through the whole labor push process. And next thing I know, he's popped out, and he's being taken and wrapped up into like their little incubator and all of that. And he cried, he had his own breath, and he cried and was breathing on his own, which was a very good sign. So they wrapped him up to keep him warm, because at that point he had come out at, what was it, I think 700 grams, which is 1.5 pounds. Like, he was little, he was tiny, he was not ready, but here he was, earthbound. And he had cried. And so I didn't get to hold him, nothing like that. They pretty much take them right away to NICU to get whatever. They go on caffeine, they get hooked up to the machine, they keep track of all their vitals at that point. And so here he is, on Earth, 70% chance. We don't know what's going to happen. Things have already obviously gone completely sideways, and in a manner that we could never have guessed or expected. So going forward, that's about all we could do, is just kind of go with the flow and hope for the best. And he had come out, and then I actually, when they went to go to do the second part of the delivery, The placenta wouldn't detach, so then I got rushed off for DMC, only later to find out that it had been infected. And that could have possibly led to the early birth, but that's only one reason that could have been a factor. But anyways, it had happened. He was here. He was up in the NICU. I had so much blood loss because of all of that that I was put on bed rest for another 24 hours before I was allowed to get up. And that was because I actually ended up fainting when I did get up to go to the bathroom post-birth. And so they, at that point, said, no, you're staying in bed for 24 hours. They made sure that my blood sugars got back up with food and all that. And so my son, obviously my husband was able to go up and see my son and get information and all of that and bring it down to me from the nurses. But I had to stay in the post-delivery room and just kind of get information as it came. And I wasn't able to go up until a full 24 hours after to actually see my son for the first time. And he was so tiny, and he was wrapped up in like a little halo of bedding in an incubator, hooked up with all these different various lines with machines, and just not something you would expect when you first have your first child, or any child really. And it was, I mean, I didn't know what to do. He was so tiny. Could I touch him? Was I even allowed? Like, and this is a moment when normally a mother's holding her child back down in the bedroom, and I didn't even know if I could hold mine. It was, I felt very, very detached, but at the same time, like, I had carried him already. I knew I loved him. And the thought of losing him really, really scared me. But it took a lot of adjusting to that environment. And then when I did kind of, I mean, you never fully get used to it. You really don't. It's a hard environment to be in. And there's a lot that goes on, but we started to kind of learn what certain beeps meant on the machines, what the certain, like, which lines were the heart rate, which ones were the breathing, which ones were, you know, and what was normal and not normal. We learned a lot of medical NICU terms, which once again, no brand new parent should have to learn or go through. But that was just our new reality. He was an NICU baby. He had come way too early. In fact, he had come 15 weeks early. And I mean, this is obviously, NICUs have progressed a long way from where they ever used to be. So I mean, he really did have the best chance possible, and he was in a place that he needed to be, and I was glad that I was on bed rest in the hospital when it happened, because it had happened so quickly, like a matter of minutes, really. I'm not joking. A matter of minutes to push out 1.5 pounds. So I think part of me was probably in a little bit of shock too. That here we were, this was our situation, this was happening. I think there was a little bit of denial. I felt kind of detached for the first bit, but I was there just kind of going through survival mode, really, and doing my best to kind of cope with and adapt, and I didn't really have time to stop and think, because now here this little baby was out in the world early, unknown chances of what would come his way, and as his parent, I had to learn to advocate for him. I had to speak for what was best for him at that point. So he remained intubated for quite a while, and what they would try to do is occasionally try to what they call extubate. and that would be to remove the breathing tube and see how he does. And so those were unsuccessful multiple times. We had been told that most of the time, once kids kind of reached their ideal weight, which for them was I think 5 pounds before they send them home, and once they're kind of breathing on their own and feeding properly and all of that, they can get sent home. And so that was our goal, but for him, we never did get around to being able to feed him. He reached his weight fairly easily, so there were no issues there. But it was every time they tried to extubate, sorry, that's for some reason I would have difficulty saying that, they would try to extubate him, it would be unsuccessful and he'd end up needing that breathing tube again. And so usually when that happens, what they do is the hospital he was born at had an EQ, yes, but they weren't a hospital by any means. So we got on a day transfer after, I would say, almost 2 months on the breathing tube. We got a transfer over for a consult for them to go and look at his airways and try to figure out why he couldn't successfully come off of it. And at first they didn't really know much other than his airways were kind of narrow, and they figured, well, you know, once he grows some more and all of that, he should be able to come off it. So they sent us back. They wanted him to grow some more, and then we continued to kind of get transferred back, and it was finally apparent that we were going to need, you know, these specialized kind of consults a little bit more regularly. And so we had to wait for a bed to open up at the more specialized hospital, and eventually got transferred over to there in what would have been the new year at that point. And so we got transferred over to the NICU over there while we received all this additional extra kind of specialized support and help. And we continued to kind of go down this path still. And he got what they called a bronchoscopy, which is what looks into the airways, numerous times before finally, I think it was where he would have been at the 5 months corrected, or in around there, pretty close to 5 months corrected, where we should have long been taking him home, but obviously haven't been able to take him home safely at this point. And that's when we were told that he likely wasn't going to be able to come home safely without what they called a tracheotomy being done, which is basically the surgery that puts the trach in the tracheal tubes to help someone breathe. And we didn't know much about this, and that was a very scary idea. Bringing home this infant with a trach, basically. And so we met another mom who had just recently had it done for her kid, and were able to kind of see what that looked like, and asked her what it was like and stuff like that. And we of course were able to talk to the ENT doctor, which is the ear, nose, throat specialist, and kind of ask him as well any questions that we had and concerns. And so they said the sooner we kind of made that decision, the better it would be for him, because he had stopped growing at that point as well. And obviously being in a hospital, you can't really meet a lot of the milestones that most infants would be able to meet. And so unfortunately we had to go down the path where our son had to get a trach put in order to breathe without the tubes, which would change our lives drastically coming home with him, because not only would we have to learn trach care and how to manage a trach, but safety reasons if it came out, how to deal with that. And that also meant 24/7 watching, because if it came out, he would stop breathing within time. For him, if it came out, he would stop breathing very quickly because his airways were essentially collapsing and there was no support and they were so narrow. So we had to be pretty quick. So we learned, obviously had to authorize that procedure being done for him, which we eventually decided that was going to be our best option for getting him home and safe. And even though that was a very hard decision and really a tough idea, really, to kind of digest, because this was not our vision for a family at all when it happened, or how it would go, and the care and time and all of that. And that meant medically our child had this disability because he now relied on his trach to breathe. So that happened. He got that in when he was about 5 months. And then we had to learn, obviously, how to keep that site clean and dry and all of that. And so my husband actually was the first one to kind of really dive in and start learning some of that. I was a little bit slower. I had a hard time, I guess, coming to terms that our son had a trach and that we would have to learn this to come home. And so it took me a little bit longer to kind of come around and start learning some of that. But eventually I did. We started kind of slow. Like I said, we learned just kind of the daily care for that. And then of course trach changes were something that happened once a month. So you'd have to take out the trach tube and reinsert a fresh, clean, brand new one on a monthly basis. And how to, of course, do that safely was something that we would have to learn. And once again, my husband was really, really good, and he was kind of the first one to dive in and learn how to do that. And I took a little bit longer to kind of come around. It was something I never did like doing, and I would never want to do it again. It was a very hard thing to have to do. Day-to-day care, that was minimal. I didn't mind that in the long run. It was just the changing of the trach and the constant worry that it was going to come out, or that it was going to snag on something and come out, and just having that, making sure no, water or anything like that got in. Like you couldn't take them swimming. You couldn't submerge them in water for a bath. Like laying them on kind of their backs or partially kind of upright position like you normally would with a child or an infant that you're giving a bath to in those little bathtubs. He would either always had to be sitting straight up, or we had to get him a chair that was lifted out of the water and kind of more sponge bathe at that point. So there was a little bit more finicky care around that. And also along with the trach came a G-tube, which is a tube inserted into the stomach to give them their nutrition, because obviously swallowing is something that's not safe at that point. So that was another thing that our son had come home to, and by the time we had gone through all this, plus your normal up and downs in an EQ, we didn't bring him home until about 10 days before his birthday. So we were in the hospital for about 364-ish days before we finally got home. And this is us every day going in and visiting the hospital. And we would spend anywhere from a couple of hours to an entire day there. So that added up, and my husband at the time, it was best for him not to work. And coming home also looked a lot different because you couldn't just bring our son home and have him home, because obviously he's 24/7 care. So along with bringing him home came allowing a home care team into our house, which meant in order for us to get any downtime or sleep, we had to either have a nurse in our home overnight or our home care person. And the main difference was usually they would just send in somebody with a home care who could do the suctioning, the diaper changes, the G-tube hookups for feeding, doing some of the basic care. But if the trach came out, they would have to wake us up or let us know, because they didn't have the adequate training to reinsert it. So overnight, we now had this person coming into our home nightly just so that we could get some sleep. That took a lot of adjusting to, having a stranger in the home and essentially trusting them with your child that you barely trust yourself with at this point, because they have some special needs that require a lot of care and attention. And that took quite a bit of adjusting to, and you never really had privacy, because they would have access to your bathroom, your kitchen, your child's bedroom, and they were up all night in your home doing all of that. So I mean, you'd have various lights often kind of turned on so that they could see what they were doing. And it was just, it was a lot. It was extremely stressful. And something I was extremely thankful to not have to worry about when the trach finally did come out, which I will get around to that. But on top of needing somebody in our home overnight, we also had to have respite, which was a registered nurse who could actually, if the G-tube, or not the G-tube, if the trach came out, they could, they were trained to put it back in. So this was like a full-on respite care, where ideally we should be able to, you know, leave the home, get our own errands done, get our own stuff done, get a break, go out on a date, whatever, kind of allowed us some downtime from being a caregiver on top of being a parent. So that was something that had gone on in our home for about 2.5 years before the trach came out. And there was one incident when he still had the trach in where it came out overnight, and our home care lady had to wake us up, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs, and I still remember this like it was yesterday. But the trach had come out, and we never flew out of our bed faster than we did that night. And it was, my husband was right in there. He was doing CPR because our son was going like black. We were losing him. because the trach edit happened so quickly. And I just remember I was on the phone, 911, telling them our son wasn't breathing, that he had a trach, that it had come out. And I'm trying to communicate with them what's going on and communicate to 911 what was going on. And of course they were just trying to focus on getting our son breathing, so it was extremely hard to kind of coordinate because we were both in these different mindsets and trying to do the best that we could and all of that. And we got the trach back in, we got, my husband got our son breathing again. 911 emergency, I remember they were saying, okay, you should be hearing sirens right about now or soon. And it felt like forever before I heard those sirens. And then even when I heard them, I still remember it feeling like forever for them to actually get there, for me to let them into the home. And then we ended up taking him by the ambulance to the hospital. We hadn't secured the trach. It was in, but we hadn't secured it because there's ties that secure it around the neck. So my husband was just kind of holding it in while emergency was bagging him the entire way there, before they could kind of safely check that, you know, everything was okay and all that, because there was a little bit of blood getting it back in. And just with him having lost consciousness because we had almost lost him, just making sure that there was no additional damage that was done in that moment. And I just remember being in shock, being out of it, being kind of numb. I think my parents might have actually, they might have been phoned in that process, and I recall them maybe driving me in because I was in no condition to follow behind. And so I remember that moment still like it was yesterday. But then eventually the trach did come out, and that was no longer a worry. But there was a long time where we had that. He was on the ventilator. That was coming everywhere with us. And in order to get to the point of getting rid of that trach, he had to go through 2 airway surgeries. 2 separate airway surgeries, and the first one was just where they took a piece of his ribs and they gave his airways that support to stay open on the one side. And then they had to go back in a second time and just kind of restructure the other side to make it a little bit thicker, and so that it wasn't, so that it had the support it needed as well to stay open, before we were finally able to successfully get rid of that trach. So he went through two major airway surgeries, and it was the second one. I remember he ended up getting a really bad bed sore on the back of his head, which prevented, actually damaged his hair follicles, so that he no longer has hair growing in that spot. And I would say, no word of a lie, it was probably like a decent size of a spot that's bald back there. After the trach came out, there were still multiple what they call bronchs, anyways, that had needed to be done, just to continue to check on the airways to make sure everything had healed, was staying open, that there were no additional issues that kind of presented themselves after the fact. Thankfully nothing came up with those, which is good. But since then, my son has had one surgery for the back of his head, which just kind of goes in, got rid of some of the scar tissue and pulled that bald spot a little bit tighter and smaller. So he's going to need at least one more of those that I know of, before ideally the concept is just for him to have a small tiny scar line that will be pretty much hidden by the hair and very unnoticeable. And of course, as he gets older and bigger, that's going to be less and less in size. We still have the G-tube, so he's still very much special needs. And with him having been born at the 24 plus 6 week mark, there's a lot of delays. We have major speech delays, a couple of kind of fine and gross motor delays as well. But he does say a couple of words. He's using some signs where we have specialized services that comes in our home and helps us out with a lot of that. And we have a behavior analyst that kind of helps us with some of the aggressive behaviors when he gets frustrated and doesn't understand things, and kind of help us to better communicate and get him on following some of those routines that maybe aren't his preferred activities, and just kind of helping him learn in a safe environment for his delays. And so now we have those people coming in our home, but thankfully they're only here for a couple of hours and then they leave, and it's not nearly as bad as having someone in our home overnight and every night of the week, and having next to no breaks. Our son now is 6. He went through 2 years of pre-K just to kind of prepare him for school, and now he's in kindergarten at a special needs school. And so they do a lot of like your normal kindergarten play, circle time, songs, stuff like that. But they also have a speech person and OTs and stuff that come in and work with the kids one-on-one a couple times a week or once a week or that kind of thing. And they work on kind of skills, those skills as well. So he does get that in school. Like I said, he is starting to use signs. He is using some words. He has actually come a long, long way since he was first born, and is turning into quite the character. He often makes us laugh, his grandparents laugh. He's been making his specialized services team members laugh, and he's always been such a happy boy. Like, it's not very often we see him truly kind of unhappy or upset about something. And he likes to explore and play, and he's just a little bit of a goofball, and so he's always doing silly things. And he's actually extremely smart. He picks up on new habits quite quickly. He catches on to routines quite quickly. He understands a lot more than he can say, so we can ask him down to the point to even go grab us a certain stuffy, or he uses chewies, which is kind of like a little hard rubber plastic kind of chew device that's often used to help kids kind of focus and concentrate. It's often used for autism, but it works great for him just to kind of stay focused. And he's always kind of like to lick things, so that kind of gives him something else to get his oral stimulation from. And so we can ask him down to the point to, you know, where's your chewy? Go get your chewy. And he'll go and he'll get it and bring it, and tell him, you know, or where's your whatever stuffy, and he goes and grabs that exact stuffy. Like, he's quite smart. So we know all of that's there to just, these delays really are what's holding him back right now. And so we're working, of course, working on that almost daily in some form. And yeah, there's not really much more that I can say. That's kind of going to continue to be a work in progress, I think, for a bit here. And of course, working on that oral piece, getting him to learn and eat without the G-tube. That's quite a process in itself, because of course that's the only form of nutrition and food that he knows. And just getting him to trust what we're offering him is something he can eat safely, and learning how to chew and bite and swallow. And because he was born so young, he has a lot of texture and oral aversions, so we've even had to spend a lot of time just helping him get used to having different textures in his mouth before he would even start to lick food. So that is still very much a large piece that we do a lot of food play and a lot of oral stimulation for him. He still gets very overstimulated right now when there's a lot of exciting things going on, or a lot of noise, or just a lot of stuff in general. We were actually told that, or the school has noticed, that a lot of times when he's there, he would jump from activity to activity, and that was just because his brain was working like 3 steps ahead of where he was at. So he would be bouncing from one thing to another, just to kind of, because he would be, okay, playing with this, and then, oh, but I want to play with that, no, I want to play with that, and so he would just kind of do that. So there was a lot of work too, even just to kind of get him to stay and focus on one activity, to stay and focus on one spot, because he's a very active little boy as well. It's not very often we see him sitting still and just kind of relaxing, but he's definitely a little character, and he's coming along, and he's taking amazing steps that just, like, it's amazing what he does and can accomplish. And he's so determined, and he's so persistent. He's a great little problem solver, and it's amazing to see all of that in him, and to see that grow, and him just kind of reach those milestones that are essentially so much easier for your normal child. When he reaches them, they're huge. So basically, any little kind of progress or kind of milestone that he hits taught us to kind of just celebrate it, really, because they were huge for him, and we couldn't really look at the normal milestones for kids because he wasn't following a typical pattern. He kind of had his own, so that kind of showed us. That took a little bit of adjusting too, and kind of showed us, you know, kind of how to mark milestones for him too, because he went at his own pace, and that was something we welcomed, having him the way that we did, although it wasn't ideal and definitely wasn't the way that I thought it would go when I became a mother. I wouldn't trade it for the world, because it taught a lot about myself as a person. It taught me a lot about even my husband as a person, and watching my son hit those little milestones and celebrating each and every one of them were just amazing. Like, he's just a special little guy, and I wouldn't trade him for anything, and he's everything to me, and I couldn't imagine life without him now. But yeah, so that's his story. So if you hear me talking about him he is delayed, but I mean, the things he's doing now are great and amazing, and the stories I tell about him will often talk about little things like his overstimulation and where he's at with sometimes food, and maybe little funny things he's done, like when we had our specialized services in, he loves putting on other people's coats, and so he ended up putting on his behavior analyst's coat and shoes and started parading around the house as if it was his own little fashion show. And he was just loving every second of it. And he does silly things like putting stuffies on his head thinking they're hats, and he thinks that's great. And our poor dogs get hats put on them, and he thinks that's great. And he's got like this little mad scientist laugh when he's super excited about something, and which of course always tickles me, and I end up dying laughing myself because it's too perfect, really. But yeah, he's a special little guy, and he has a large story, and he's been through quite a bit in his little life that a lot of adults haven't even dealt with and been through, and he's just an amazing little character, and I can't wait to see what he does next and what he accomplishes and what he becomes as he gets older. So I'm going to end the video here, and we'll talk to you all later. See you in the next video. Bye.